everyone, and welcome to another episode of Books and Mortar with me, your host, Razia, where we talk about the books that build us. So this episode, I'm focusing on a book called A Mindful of Murder by Landy. So A Mindful of Murder is actually the 16th book in the Skulduggery Pleasant series, right? That's right, you heard me correctly, 16. That is quite the achievement, honestly, to continue a series for that long as a single author. And not just that, but for the series to actually be hugely successful. So the first book was published in 2007, and the first one that I read is actually called Kingdom of the Wicked, which was book 7 in the series. So I don't know how I managed that, but even so, I enjoyed the book anyway, and then I went to find the others, and I have honestly never looked back. The story is about Valkyrie Cain and Skulduggery Pleasant, who are both sorcerers and detectives. But at this point in the story, they're actually called arbiters, and they're essentially completely independent investigators. And did I mention that Skulduggery is a skeleton? He has no flesh and blood, but he has an enchantment that allows him to create this facade of a face over his skull when he needs to. So he's about 400 years old, and he was a very, very angry skeleton because an evil sorcerer named Nefarian Serpine killed his wife and child, and then when he tried to kill Skulduggery, death just kind of didn't stick. But the side effect was that he came back as a skeleton. So you might be wondering about the creative names here. So in Landy's world, people have 3 names, right? You have your given name, which is the name that your parents give you. You have your chosen name, which is the name that you pick for yourself. Because if a sorcerer finds out your given name, they can actually use it to control you. And then you have your true name. No one knows what your true name is, and if you had to find out, you would be overwhelmed by so much power that you'd probably be driven mad, and you'd be very, very destructive. So there's actually a book of names that contains every single person's true name, but it's locked away by the sanctuary, which is kind of like the governing bodies of the magical population across the world. So these particular stories are based in Ireland. Landy is Irish, and Valkyrie lives in a place called Haggard in Ireland. So that's just a little bit of background. So, to summarize 16 books is very difficult. And they tend to kind of be grouped as trilogies. So I suppose 15 books. They're kind of grouped as trilogies. So you can read 3, and it kind of focuses on different themes throughout the series. So Skulduggery and Valkyrie are partners, and they essentially solve mysteries. So Valkyrie was 12 years old in book 1, and now in book 16 she's 31 years old. I think to continue to write a character from her adolescence into adulthood can actually be challenging, because you have to sort of keep to her personality and changing her and evolving her enough to be plausible, So obviously, needless to say, Valkyrie has changed a lot since book 1. She's calmed down, and she serves as more of an anchor for Skulduggery now compared to when she did when she was younger. So the thing is that they are both super impressed with themselves. They're extremely arrogant about their abilities, and they wear their attitude on their sleeves, right? But they're super likable to most people anyway. And I think that Landy is pretty impressed with him too, and I think he's a bit impressed with himself as well. So he's actually doing a reread of his books at the moment, and I'm following his progress on X, and it's pretty entertaining. I think he's forgotten the things that he's written, and now he's going through it again. So there's a lot of banter between Skulduggery and Valkyrie, and it's part of what makes these books so lovable, I think. When Valkyrie, which is not her real name, by the way, Valkyrie is her chosen name, right? Not her given name. When she first meets Skulduggery in book 1, her uncle Gordon had just died, and Skulduggery was at the funeral. So her uncle Gordon was an author, and he used to write stories about magic and adventures. And at that point, Valkyrie had no idea that it was actually real. So afterwards, Valkyrie is attacked in her uncle's house, and Skulduggery turns up to rescue her. So after that, she suspects that her uncle was actually murdered, and she insists that she wants to go around with Skulduggery until he reluctantly agrees. She threatens to stand on his hat, and he agrees. So she feels that now that she knows a world of magic exists, she can't go back to her normal life. And I agree with her, to be honest. I would probably do the same thing. So, humans always have a knack of choosing the things that are worse for them, right? So, but Valkyrie never really felt like she fitted into her usual life. And I think that she always felt that there must be something more. So all of the people, though, that she comes across afterwards warn her about Skulduggery, and they tell her that his moral compass doesn't necessarily point north, and that she would do well to not be too influenced by him. But I think that by this point, it's probably too late. So Skulduggery takes her under his wing, in a sense, and he then helps her to develop her magical abilities. So, as I mentioned, book number 16, and there are another 2 set to be released. So he says that it's the beginning of a new trilogy. I am not sure how many he intends to write, but I recommend that you read these books in order because there are references to previous events, and I don't think you'd like to be in the dark. Especially, once you get into book number 16, it's probably a good idea to read them in order. It's very difficult to summarize 15 books, right? But I'm going to tell you that Armageddon has pretty much ensued, but the world was reset. Okay, so this is where book 16 picks up, and while the mortals have no memory of what happened, the sorcerers do. They remember how the mortals turned on them when they found out about magic, and also how many of them were slaughtered, and not all of them are very willing to forgive. So let me just read the synopsis at the back of the book. 6 years ago, the universe ended. When it restarted, it brought with it a darkness that remains hidden from the mortal population. A week ago, fueled by unimaginable hatred, a masked sorcerer killed one of those mortals. Then he killed another and another. Skulduggery Pleasant and Valkyrie Cain must work to solve the puzzles the killer leaves behind before more innocents die, embarking on a journey that will force them to deal with the apocalypse they failed to prevent the first time around. And murder. Lots and lots of murder. And it's true, there was a lot of murder, and it was pretty gruesome, right? So that you understand what I mean, one of the victims has their insides shredded to pieces, but their skin remained intact. So she just collapsed into this bag of skin, which was just really gross. So in this book, there are 2 parallel storylines, right? And it's actually that's the case in most of the books. And I will warn you that there are some spoilers in this podcast. So Skulduggery and Valkyrie are trying to find the murderer, while your parallel story, a young lady named Winter Grieving, attending the Cornwall Academy for Sorcerers, finds herself swept up into anti-mortal groups in an attempt to find a friend who actually went missing. So let's look at Winter's story first. Her best friend's name is Mia, who is honestly as bright as Winter is dark. They actually reminded me a lot of Wednesday and Enid. Winter is kind of a loner. She's introverted and antisocial. And she has a friend in Mia and a crush on a boy named Tia Galling, whose parents are believed to be 2 of the biggest supervillains ever. So, So Winter and Mia's friend Brazen goes missing, and Mia convinces Winter that they should try and find her. So Winter only somewhat agrees. In fact, her actual words are, "And if my friend is dumb enough to want to help some toxic, nasty witch we once sat with at lunch, then I'm dumb enough to want to help her." Which is very sweet, right? She's a loyal friend, yeah. So they find out that Brazen has been hanging around with a guy named Alta Veers, who has connections to one of the anti-mortal terrorist groups that have popped up since the reset. So these groups vary in terms of their strategies, from peaceful protest to violence and bloodshed, and the one that Brazen and Alta are connected with falls somewhere in the middle. So they attend one of the meetings and they find Brazen there, but she's quite dedicated to the cause and she doesn't want to go with him. So interestingly, Alta then tries to recruit Winter, who with all her teenage indifference doesn't seem like the type to want to get involved with something like that, right? But he seems to have a lot of confidence in her abilities, because he tells her that he could actually see her end up running the group that he's with, which is called the Order of the Ancients. But Winter isn't having it, right? She feels that they're bigots and she's not interested in killing anyone. So Alta asks if she would join them, and Winter tells him that if she joins, it would only be to spy on them. And He says, yeah, well, I'm okay with that. So her first task with him is to find and apprehend a man who's stolen something from the Order. So they manage to do this, and Winter then finds out that the item that they were meant to recover was a vial of a very powerful explosive that the Order is actually going to use to blackmail the sanctuaries into meeting their demands. So a powerful explosive, meaning that it could flatten Dublin into non-existence, right? So that's the kind of level that you're talking about. So of course her conscience gets in the way and she foils their plan. Yeah, Winter. And that is pretty much Winter's story for this book, right? But it's not the end of Winter's story. So just like some foreshadowing here, because after all there are another 2 books that are set to come out, right? Winter's a very intelligent girl, and she definitely has some untapped potential here, and I think that she might make some bad decisions going forward just to forge a path for herself and to gain some notoriety of her own. She does seem to have like some lingering resentment towards the mortals as well, and there's a piece in the later part of the book that goes, lunchtime in Dublin on a sunny day, and all the mortals were sitting outside the cafes and sharing benches and generally acting like they weren't all a load of murderous bigots who turn on those different from themselves the moment the cracks started to appear in their safe little lives. Yikes. So this is Winter's thought process. And it's an odd situation, right? Because the mortals don't remember what they did. And if you read book 16 and 15, you see that they did some really atrocious things, right? But the sorcerers remember. So how do you hold someone accountable for something they don't know they've done? And in the current timeline, they actually didn't do it at all, right? Because in the current timeline, the world didn't actually end. So none of that happened. So one of the mortals is told what he did to a sorcerer in the alternate timeline. And this person was a very close friend of his. And he says, thank you for trying to make me feel better. But attacking an innocent person, burning her alive, that is something that I'm capable of doing. You push me the wrong way, you take away certain particular things, and this is what I will do. I think this is a common quandary amongst people. What would I do in a particular situation? You know, how far would I go to protect myself, to protect someone I love? And this is what he thought he was doing when he burned this mage alive. But he's not happy that he was capable of doing that to a friend, someone he knew, right? And I think that we like to believe that we're all ultimately good people and that we would find it difficult to deliberately hurt someone else, much less kill them. But you don't really know that until you're in that situation. But imagine you knew that now about yourself, that you were actually capable of killing someone and of burning them alive. And then on top of it, believing that you were doing the right thing, right? And I think that's a very, very heavy realization. I don't know how you live with that afterwards. And I think he had trouble with it as well. So I think that at some point, also, there will be a showdown between Winter and Valkyrie. They're very close. Valkyrie helps her to take down the Order of the Ancients. And Valkyrie also has very strong protective instincts towards Winter. So it would be actually quite interesting to see how that struggle would go, right? So let's see if I'm right, but I think that that's what's going to happen in the next 2 books. So that's Winter, right? So let's get on to the main storyline of Skulduggery and Valkyrie. They're on the trail of the masked serial killer who calls himself Ursats. So Ursats means an inferior substitute for the real thing, which is an interesting choice of name, right? So Ursats has killed 2 mortals using this insanely powerful wand that seems to allow Ursats to do pretty much anything, even things that shouldn't physically be possible. So Skulduggery and Valkyrie are really struggling with this one, and as I mentioned, they are now arbiters, so it's technically a promotion, and this is what being an arbiter means. We're arbiters, Skulduggery said, putting his hat on. We have jurisdiction over every sanctuary investigation around the world. We answer to no one and we choose our own cases. We've chosen this case, detective. We're taking over. So that's what it means for them to be arbiters, and that also really describes Skulduggery in a nutshell. He's assertive, he is super intelligent, and he is arrogant as all heck. But he has reason to be, right? But it's not generally socially acceptable to be openly arrogant and to openly state your perceived superiority to others. The issue is that the English sanctuary now wants to impose a kind of oversight committee on Skulduggery and Valkyrie, and they're not happy about it, right? So the committee would give them access to the newest technology or magical technology, but it will also dictate which cases they should take. And the problem is that if in the instance the English sanctuary needs to be investigated, well, then what happens? They're probably going to push it under the carpet. We'll watch the watchmen either way. So they're investigating the murders, and it turns them onto the death of a sorcerer named Rumor Mills. That's a really cool name, right? And so they do the detective thing, and they visit her apartment to look for clues. And it stirs up some feelings for Valkyrie that I've actually also had while watching some of these crime series, right? So I've been watching The Mentalist lately, and this is also something that I felt. So this is what Valkyrie says. Searching the homes of suspects was a thrill. A vital discovery was always a possibility. But searching the homes of the dead was draining. It emptied her heart bit by bit. She was sifting through a life left behind, cataloguing and then dismissing the objects that had once been so important to someone, objects that have now been stripped of their meaning. That's sad, isn't it? That your belongings only have the value and the meaning that you've given them, and they don't hold that same value for anyone else. And the worst part is that detectives always tend to cast aspersions on the victim, trying to relate them to some kind of sinister activity, which I think is very insensitive. But I suppose they're just doing their jobs, right? So during their investigation, they come across an old boyfriend of Rumors, and his name is, wait for it, his name is Handsome Whitlock. Yeah, he chose that name, right? So Handsome is an influencer. He's on social media, and Skulduggery has absolutely no idea what that means and what Handsome does. But there was an interaction between Handsome and Valkyrie, right, that actually made me laugh. So Valkyrie doubted Handsome knew anything too top secret, but she let it slide on account of how good looking he was. So this cracked me up because I've thought this as well, right? That you will allow someone to get away with a lot more if you perceive them as attractive, right? Just think about it. So Valkyrie and Skulduggery have been partners for 19 years, and they know each other really well. So just to give you an idea of how well they know each other and what their relationship is like. So remember, Skulduggery is a skeleton. He has no face. He has a skull. He has no eyes. He has no lips. He cannot create facial expressions of any kind, right? He can only do this when he has a facade up, which he doesn't always. But so this is what their relationship is like. So this is Valkyrie. "You're pleased with yourself," she said, hanging her helmet from the handlebars. "I haven't said one word," he replied. "You've got that look on your face." "My facade isn't up." "I'm not talking about your facade." She swung her leg off the bike. "I'm talking about your face. The one I don't have. That's the one." So I feel that if you can read the expressions on a skeleton, then I think you know him pretty well, yeah? So their reputation as a duo really precedes them, and they make quite a fearsome pair. This is something that the scientist Regatta says to them when they're asking him if he will relinquish the powerful wand used by ersatz to them. So he says, "I don't trust anyone to do anything," Regatta answered. "That's why I chose science. Science doesn't take sides. But if you two are holding yourselves up as paragons of virtue, I'm afraid I'd have to object. Anyone who knows about you, anyone who's ever heard about the things you've done, would all agree on one thing. You value each other more than anyone else." "What's that thing you say? What was it I read in the transcript from years ago?" "Oh yes, until the end. It's Skulduggery Pleasant and Valkyrie Cain together against the world. You're not any more or less incorruptible than the rest of us. All it takes is the right sort of leverage." And this is completely true. You need to read books 1 to 15 to really understand the depth of their relationship. But Regatta is correct when he says that they value each other more than anyone else. And I have no doubt that if it came to using the wand to save each other or to save the world, they would choose each other. So Regatta is doing some test on Ursa's wand to try and understand how it works, because no sorcerer worth their salt would use a wand, right? And of course the wand gets stolen, and then Valkyrie and Skulduggery have to recover it. So in this book we see that their status as arbiters is not necessarily great, because it just allows them to continue working alone even if they actually need help. And Skulduggery Pleasant is not the kind of guy who would admit that he needs help even if he is friends with the Grand Mage. So the Grand Mage is the head of the sanctuary. So as I mentioned, Ursatz is targeting mortals, and 2 of them are killed on their watch, and the Grand Mage is really angry with him. I think it's really difficult for him though, because he is personal friends with Skulduggery and Valkyrie. So it's kind of a conflict of interest. But now he really has a bigger picture to consider, and he tries really hard to balance it. Hey? I can appreciate the difficulty that he goes through. So there's a bit of a confrontation between him and Valkyrie, and he tells her, 2 mortals died, Valkyrie, and we tried to stop that from happening, and you failed. So we try again tomorrow. You should have called in backup. That's not generally how we work. And that generally works out for you, the Grand Mage said. I know that better than almost anyone, but it didn't this time, did it? This time you went up against an opponent you still don't understand, wielding a weapon you haven't yet learned to counter. So you can see that her and Skulduggery really believe in their abilities, even if things don't work out, even if people die. And I felt like it was a little bit careless of her to say, so we try again tomorrow. Just, in the sense that those lives don't really matter. And yeah, I'll just give it another shot tomorrow. And that is perhaps taking it too far, and maybe then some kind of an oversight committee is not such a bad idea. So, of course, they eventually confront Ursatz by solving a bunch of riddles that he sends them. And it's very interesting to see how Skulduggery's mind works through these things. I feel like through all of his books, it's the first time that he really takes you through Skulduggery's thought process. And he's really super smart. 'Cause I suppose, he's been around for more than 400 years. So you probably pick up a thing or two. And he says that he reads a lot and he remembers a lot of what he reads. So eventually they confront Ursatz, and they are then presented with an ultimatum. Valkyrie tells Skulduggery that she hopes he has a plan, and he tells her that he doesn't have plans. Plans are for other people. He has a meticulous schedule of non-spontaneous improvisations. And he, of course, figures out who Ursatz is because he's really smart, and he saves the day. So through this book, Valkyrie is really in awe of Skulduggery's intelligence, and that's a first for her as well. I think she does note how clever he is, but I think in this case, she actually realizes how smart he is and how far his intelligence is beyond her own and pretty much anyone else she knows. And she's in awe of his intelligence and his methods of deduction to a point where, for the first time, she feels inferior to him. And she wonders what it is like for him, who is as smart as he is, to talk to her, someone who is always miles behind him and continuously playing catch-up. And this eventually leads to a really lovely conversation between the 2 of them that I'm going to share with you. You asked what it's like for me, Skulduggery said, to be so smart and surrounded by people who don't think as fast as I do. It can at times be difficult, but it's only ever aggravating when I have to deal with an incurious mind. You do not have an incurious mind, Valkyrie. Because of that, you are unpredictable, incisive, and challenging. In his timeline, Cadaver was alone for so long. He didn't have anyone. He forgot the value that other people bring. He is intellect and will. He has no warmth or compassion. He does not view outside perspectives as being worthy of his consideration. These are things you allow me to have. That and strength. One of these days I'll have to face Cadaver, and it will be him or it will be me. He thinks he'll win because my connections, my attachments make me weak, but he has forgotten how strong you make me. He turned his head to her. That's why I keep you around. Valkyrie looked up at him from the floor, feeling the knot of emotion rise through her throat. When she was sure her voice wasn't going to crack, she smiled and said, "Lame." He laughed. So, this is that lovely sentiment that we are stronger together, and that our ability to love doesn't make us weak, but our human connections are actually the things that fortifies us, and it helps us move through this jungle of a life. And if you found your people in this world, you really are indeed amongst the richest of us, like Skulduggery and Valkyrie. I'm not crying, you're crying. I absolutely love all of the Skulduggery Pleasant novels, right? All of them. They're grand. I can reread all of these books and not be bored. And I think I've rated all of them 5 stars. and they're all rated over 4 stars on Goodreads. So Derek Landy also has a few spin-offs here. One of them is called Hell Breaks Loose, which is actually a prequel, and it was released last year. I didn't even know that it was coming out, so I was super ecstatic to see a new Skulduggery on the shelf at the bookstore. And Hell Breaks Loose was actually one of my best reads of 2023. 2023 was a very bad reading year. Anyway, something about Derek Landy that I love is his dedications. They're generally quite amusing. I don't often make it a point to specifically read the dedications, but I do his. So please do yourself a favor and give them a read. They're quite entertaining. So the Skulduggery books are classified as young adult, which I agree with because they are pretty violent. I wouldn't say it's set in stone though, because in the first era of books, Valkyrie is quite young, and I don't feel that they were too intense. But I would say that from maybe 14 years and older would be appropriate, but obviously it's at your discretion. All of these books are available at Exclusive Books and at Bargain Books, and the first 9 are available as a box set. I'm not sure how many of these books Derek Landy intends to write about Skulduggery and Valkyrie, but as long as he keeps writing, I'll keep reading until the end. Thank you so much for listening. This was another episode of Books and Mortar with me, your host, Razia, where we talk about the books that build us. Bye!